The Gulfstream G650ER gleamed under the harsh halogen lights of the Teterboro hangar, a $70 million bird of prey waiting to hunt the sky. Captain Richard Aaron ran a hand along the fuselage, convinced he was the king of this domain. He wasn't just a pilot, he was the gatekeeper. But in less than an hour, the man who thought he controlled the cockpit would be begging for his career, his reputation, and his very survival. He looked at the young black woman standing by the landing gear and sneered. He thought she was affirmative action. He didn't know she was the landlord, and when the truth hit him, it wouldn't just hurt. It would end him. The morning air at Teterboro Airport was crisp, smelling faintly of Jet A1 fuel and old money. Teterboro wasn't just an airport, it was the staging ground for the masters of the universe. If you were flying out of JFK, you were traveling. If you were flying out of Teterboro, you had arrived. Captain Richard Aaron adjusted his tie in the reflection of the terminal glass. It was a Windsor knot, perfectly symmetrical, tight enough to restrict blood flow just the way he liked it. At 58, Aaron was a relic of a golden age of aviation that perhaps only existed in his own mind, an era where the captain was God. The coffee was served black and the flight deck looked a certain way. He had the jawline of a movie star, turning into a character actor. Silver hair swept back with military precision and 4 gold stripes on his epaulets that he polished more often than his shoes. He checked his Breitling Navitimer. 0700, sharp. His first officer was late, or so he hoped. It gave him something to chew on, a reason to file a report before wheels even went up. Operations? Aaron barked into his phone, not waiting for a greeting. Where is the relief pilot I specifically requested seasoned support for the Thorn flight? We have Elias Thorn flying today. You don't put a rookie in the right seat with a billionaire in the back. Good morning, Captain Aaron. The dispatcher's voice crackled, sounding tired. First Officer Johnson is already on the tarmac. Checked in 20 minutes ago. She's doing the exterior walk-around now. Aaron frowned, stepping away from the glass. Johnson, I don't know a Johnson. Is he new? There was a pause on the line. She Captain, Emma Johnson. She's top of the roster for the G650 ratings, just transferred from our European division. Aaron felt a familiar irritation prickle at the back of his neck. She. He didn't hate women pilots, he told himself constantly. He just hated the disruption. The dynamic changed. You couldn't tell the same jokes. You had to watch your tone. And if she was new... I asked for seasoned, Aaron muttered, hanging up. He grabbed his flight bag and marched out to the tarmac. The Gulfstream G650ER tail number, N728LW, sat majestic against the grey New Jersey skyline. It was the flagship of Legacy Wings, a boutique charter company that had seemingly popped up out of nowhere 3 years ago with an aggressive acquisition strategy and an immaculate safety record. Aaron had been headhunted from Delta to fly their VIPs. The pay was astronomical, the schedule brutal, but the prestige that was the drug. As he rounded the nose gear, he saw her. She was inspecting the pitot tubes, a flashlight in hand, despite the rising sun. She wore the standard uniform white shirt, navy trousers, but on her it looked tailored sharp. Her hair was pulled back in a severe professional bun. She was young, distressingly young, and she was black. Aaron slowed his pace, letting his heels click aggressively on the tarmac to announce his presence. He wanted her to look up. He wanted to see the flinch of intimidation that usually greeted him when junior pilots realized they were flying with the Rick Aaron. Emma Johnson turned, She didn't flinch. She simply clicked off her flashlight and nodded. Captain Aaron, good morning. Exterior pre-flight is complete. Tire pressure on the main gear looks optimal, but I noted a minor hydraulic fluid stain near the strut. Maintenance has already signed it off, but I double-checked the levels personally. Her voice was calm, velvety and precise. It lacked the nervous tremble he expected. Aaron stopped 2 feet from her, invading her personal space. He loomed over her, using his height as a weapon. You checked the levels personally? Yes, Captain. And who gave you the authority to sign off on my aircraft's readiness before I stepped foot on the tarmac? Emma held his gaze. Her eyes were dark, intelligent, and unyieldingly steady. Company protocol, sir. Section 4, paragraph 2. First officer is to initiate walk-around 45 minutes prior to departure to ensure VIPs are not delayed by maintenance lags. Aaron narrowed his eyes. She was quoting the manual at him. I know the manual, Johnson. I wrote the SOPs for half the fleets flying out of this state while you were still playing with Barbie dolls. I'm sure you did, Captain, she said, her tone neutral, bordering on bored. The fuel truck is inbound. We have £28,000 required for the transatlantic leg to London. I ordered $30,000 for holding contingencies. You ordered fuel. Aaron's face reddened. I determine the fuel load. Me, the captain. I placed a provisional order to hold our slot, sir. You can cancel it if you prefer to wait 40 minutes for the next tanker and explain the delay to Mr. Thorne. It was a trap, and he walked right into it. If he cancelled her order to assert dominance, they would be late. Elias Thorne was notorious for his punctuality. If they were late, Aaron looked incompetent. Leave the order, he snapped, brushing past her toward the air stairs. But don't think for a second that I'm comfortable with this cowboy attitude. You're in the right seat to watch and learn, not to command. Understood, Emma said to his back. Inside the cockpit, the tension was thick enough to choke on. Aaron slammed his flight bag into the storage crevice. He began his flow checks, moving his hands across the overhead panel with practiced, violent efficiency. Battery switches on. APU, start. Emma settled into the first officer's seat. She moved differently, efficient but fluid. She adjusted her headset and reached for the Flight Management System, FMS, to program the route. Don't touch that, Aaron barked. Emma's hand hovered over the keypad. Captain, I program the box. You check the weather again. And get me a coffee. Black. 2 sugars. Emma stared at him for a beat. The silence stretched tight as a piano wire. In the private aviation world, the first officer often helped with cabin service if there was no flight attendant, but on a G650 flying a billionaire, there was always a flight attendant. In fact, Sarah, the stewardess, was already in the galley prepping the catering. Asking the pilot to fetch coffee was a power move, a humiliation tactic. Sarah is in the galley, Captain, Emma said softly. I need to initialize the IRS so we have navigation alignment. I gave you a direct order, First Officer. Aaron swiveled his chair facing her. His face was hard, the lines around his mouth deep with disdain. You might have slipped through the cracks of HR with your diversity quota boxes ticked, but in this cockpit there is a hierarchy. You want to touch the controls of a $70 million jet. You prove you can follow simple instructions first. Coffee. Emma took a slow breath. She looked at the gold stripes on his shoulder, then at the name tag R. Aaron. I am here to fly captain, not to serve beverages. If you have a concern about my competency, we can address it with the chief pilot. Aaron laughed a dry, humorless bark. The chief pilot, Bob Halloway. Bob and I flew F-15s together in the Gulf. You think calling Bob is going to save you. Listen to me, little girl. I don't trust you. I don't know you. I don't like your attitude, and I don't think you have the sand to handle this bird if things go sideways. I think you're here because Legacy Wings wanted a brochure photo. He leaned in closer. Now, get the coffee. Emma unbuckled her harness. Aaron smirked, thinking he had broken her. She stood up, smoothing her uniform. She walked to the cockpit door, opened it, and looked back. "I'll get Sarah," she said coolly. "And while I'm back there, I'll check the passenger manifest again. I noticed a discrepancy in the weight and balance data you filed yesterday." "Excuse me," Aaron sputtered. "You calculated for 3 passengers. Mr. Thorne is bringing 4 associates. If we didn't catch that, we'd be illegal on takeoff weight distribution." She stepped out and closed the door. Aaron sat alone in the cockpit, the hum of the APU vibrating through the floorboards. His hands were shaking, not from fear, but from rage. She had corrected him. Again. And she was right. He had forgotten to update the manifest after the email from Thorne's assistant last night. He slammed his hand on the armrest. He couldn't fly with her. It wasn't just dislike anymore. It was visceral. She was a threat. She was watching him, judging him, waiting for him to slip. He couldn't operate under a microscope held by someone he considered beneath him. He grabbed his phone and dialed dispatch again. "Get me Holloway. Now!" By the time Elias Thorne's limousine rolled onto the tarmac, flanked by 2 black SUVs, the situation in the cockpit had devolved into a cold war. Aaron had refused to brief Emma on the takeoff profile. He had done the walk-around again himself, visibly checking her work, trying to find a loose screw, a missed latch, anything. He found nothing, which only made him angrier. He stood at the top of the air stairs as the cars came to a halt. The morning sun glinted off the black vehicles. Elias Thorne stepped out, a man in his late 40s, wearing a hoodie under a blazer, the uniform of the tech elite. He looked relaxed, smiling as he shook hands with his entourage. Aaron put on his best captain's smile, a veneer of charm he reserved for the people who signed the checks. "Mr. Thorne," Aaron called out, descending the stairs to meet him on the tarmac. "Welcome back to Legacy Wings." Thorne looked up, shielding his eyes. "Rick, good to see you. Clean flight today. We've got a tight schedule in London. IPO meeting." "Smooth as silk, sir." Aaron shook his hand firmly. "Although—" He lowered his voice, adopting a tone of professional concern. "We might have a slight delay." Thorne's smile faded instantly. "Delay? I don't do delays, Rick. That's why I own a share in this company." "I understand entirely, sir. It's a personnel issue." Aaron gestured vaguely toward the cockpit. "Operations assigned a reserve pilot. Very inexperienced, new to the aircraft type. During the pre-flight, I noticed several lapses in judgment. Hesitation with the flight management system. Confusion regarding fuel loads." Aaron was lying seamlessly, weaving half-truths into a narrative of incompetence. "Safety is my only priority, Mr. Thorne." Aaron continued, his voice grave. "I'm not comfortable crossing the Atlantic with a cockpit crew that isn't running at 100%. I've asked dispatch for a replacement, but they are dragging their feet." Thorne frowned, looking at his watch. "Who is it?" "A Ms. Johnson. Transferred from Europe, supposedly. I'm sure she's a fine pilot for smaller hops, but a G-50 transatlantic run with VIPs. It requires a certain gravitas, a certain experience level that she simply doesn't possess." Thorne's expression became unreadable. He looked at the plane, then back at Aaron. Johnson, Emma Johnson. Yes, that's the one. Aaron nodded, sensing victory. You know of her? I know the name, Thorne said quietly. He adjusted his glasses. So you're refusing to fly. I am exercising my captain's authority to decline an unsafe crew pairing, Aaron said, puffing out his chest. I will not risk your life, Mr. Thorne. At that moment, Emma appeared at the top of the stairs. She had the flight manifest in her hand. She looked down at the two men. Captain, she called out, her voice carrying clearly over the wind. We are slot restricted. We need to push back in 15 minutes, or we lose our window. Aaron turned his back on her, focusing solely on Thorne. See, pushy, rushing the process. That's how accidents happen. Thorne looked up at Emma. He didn't wave. He didn't smile. He just stared. Rick, Thorne said, his voice dropping an octave. I have a meeting that will determine the future of a $3 billion merger. If I miss it, heads will roll. Are you telling me you cannot manage a junior pilot? It's not about management, sir. It's about trust. I don't trust her. Thorne sighed, scratching his beard. Okay. Let's resolve this. Bring her down. Aaron smirked. This was it. The public dressing down. He would have her removed humiliation complete, and Holloway would send a chopper with a replacement pilot within the hour. Johnson, Aaron shouted. Come down here. Mr. Thorne wants a word. Emma walked down the stairs with the grace of a queen, descending a throne. She held her clipboard against her chest. When she reached the tarmac, she stood next to Aaron, facing Elias Thorne. Good morning, Mr. Thorne, she said. Emma? Thorne nodded. Rick here says you're incompetent. He says you messed up the fuel load, and you don't know the FMS. He's refusing to fly with you. Emma turned her head slowly to look at Aaron. The look wasn't anger. It was pity. Is that so, Captain? I call it like I see it. Aaron crossed his arms. You're not ready for the big leagues, honey, and I won't let you practice on my watch. Aaron turned back to Thorne. I recommend we remove her from the flight. I can fly this leg solo if I have to, or wait for a replacement. But she doesn't step foot on that plane. Thorne looked between them. The tension was electric. The ground crew had stopped loading bags to watch. Rick Thorne said, You're a hell of a pilot. I've always felt safe with you. Thank you, sir. But you have a problem. Sir, you think you work for Legacy Wings. Thorne said, a strange smile touching his lips. I do work for Legacy Wings. And who do you think owns Legacy Wings? Thorne asked. Aaron blinked. It's a holding company. Private equity. The board is in Zurich. That was true 3 years ago, Thorne said. He took a step toward Emma. But when Marcus Johnson passed away, the assets were transferred. Aaron froze. Johnson. Marcus Johnson. The tech mogul. The man who invented half the cloud computing protocols the world ran on. Marcus Johnson, Aaron stammered. I flew him once, years ago. Yes, Thorne said. He was a good friend, and he had a daughter who got her pilot's license before she got her driver's license, a daughter who graduated from Embry-Riddle with honors, a daughter who has been quietly running this company from the shadows to ensure the operational standards met her father's legacy. Aaron felt the blood drain from his face. His heart hammered against his ribs like a bird trapped in a cage. He looked at Emma. Really looked at her. Emma dropped the clipboard to her side. Her posture shifted. The deference of a first officer evaporated, replaced by the steel of an executive. Hello, Rick, Emma said, her voice dropping the formal captain. I believe we have a discrepancy in your employment understanding. Aaron's mouth opened, but no sound came out. I am not just your first officer, Emma said, stepping closer, her voice ice cold. I am the sole proprietor of Legacy Wings. I own this plane. I own the hangar we are standing in. And I own the contract that pays your pension. The silence on the tarmac was absolute. Even the wind seemed to stop. And right now, Emma whispered, I'm deciding whether to fire you on the spot or let you fly just to see if you can handle the pressure of knowing that the little girl in the right seat can end your career with a single phone call. The tarmac at Teterboro felt like a skillet, and Captain Richard Aaron was the bacon sizzling in the grease. The wind whipped at his trouser legs, but the chill he felt had nothing to do with the weather. It was the icy realization that his entire world had just inverted. Elias Thorne stood by the black SUV, a smirk playing on his lips. He looked from the pale, trembling captain to the composed young woman standing next to him. Well, Thorne said, breaking the silence that felt heavy enough to crush concrete. We're burning daylight. Rick, are you flying or are you walking home? Aaron opened his mouth, but his throat was dry as parchment. His brain was misfiring, trying to reconcile the image of the affirmative action hire with the owner of the company. Legacy Wings. It made sense now. The rapid expansion, the endless budget for maintenance, the top-tier benefits. It was Marcus Johnson's money, and this was his heir. Aaron stammered, looking at Emma. Ms. Johnson, I had no idea. Ignorance is a poor defense in aviation. Captain, Emma said. Her voice wasn't loud, but it had the weight of a gavel strike. And it's an even worse defense in business. You assumed I was incompetent because of how I look. You assumed you were untouchable because of who you are. Both assumptions were incorrect. She checked her watch. A simple functional Garmin aviator watch, not the flashy Breitling Aaron wore to signal status. Mr. Thorne needs to be in London, she continued. I am not going to cancel this flight and cost my company a client because my employee is having a breakdown. Get in the plane, Richard. Richard, not Captain, not Rick. Richard, like a scolded schoolboy. Aaron felt a surge of humiliation so acute it was physically painful. He wanted to throw his badge on the ground and storm off. He wanted to tell her to go to hell. But he couldn't. He had 2 ex-wives, a mortgage in Connecticut, and a boat he couldn't afford. If he walked away now, he wouldn't just be unemployed. He would be blacklisted. She could ensure he never flew anything bigger than a Cessna 172 again. Yes, ma'am, he whispered. He turned and walked up the air stairs. It was the longest walk of his life. Every step felt like he was wearing lead boots. He could feel her eyes on his back. He could feel Thorne's amusement. Emma followed him up, pausing at the top to shake Thorne's hand. We'll make up the time in the air, Mr. Thorne. Please make yourself comfortable. Sarah has the grimace vintage you like. Inside the cockpit, the atmosphere was toxic. Aaron sat in the left seat, his hands hovering over the controls. Usually this was his throne. Now it felt like an electric chair. Emma strapped herself into the right seat. She didn't look at him. She reached for the checklist. Before start, checklist, she announced. Her tone was strictly professional, stripped of any warmth. It was the voice of a machine. Aaron fumbled for the laminated card. His hands were shaking visibly. He tried to steady them against the yoke. Parking brake set. Throttles idle. You skipped the hydraulic pump check, Emma said, staring straight ahead at the windshield. Right. Sorry. Hydraulic pumps. Auto. Fuel quantity. 28,000 pounds, Aaron said. 30,000, Emma corrected him, her voice sharp. The 30,000 I ordered. The 30,000 you wanted to cancel, remember? Aaron swallowed hard. 30,000 pounds. Checked. They moved through the sequence. Every interaction was a knife twist. Aaron, who usually ran his cockpit with the casual arrogance of a fighter jock, was now second-guessing every switch flip. He was terrified of making a mistake, which of course made him more prone to making one. Cleared for start engine right, he mumbled. As the Rolls-Royce BR725 engine whined to life, Aaron risked a glance at her. She was monitoring the engine parameters on the glass display with hawk-like intensity. She wasn't gloating. She wasn't smiling. She was working. And that scared him more than if she had been screaming. If she was screaming, it was emotional. This was an audit. They taxied to runway 19. The radio crackled. Legacy 728, Teterboro Tower. Hold short, runway 19. Traffic is a Challenger, on short final. Hold short 19. Legacy 728, Aaron replied. He forgot to add the company call sign suffix properly. A rookie mistake. Emma keyed her mic instantly. Legacy 728, holding short 19. Be advised we are ready for immediate departure, Teterboro. Copy that, Legacy. Line up and wait. She glanced at him. Watch your comms, Captain. You sound stressed. We don't want ATC filing a report on pilot incapacitation. I'm fine, Aaron snapped, then immediately regretted the tone. I'm good. Good. Because you're flying this leg. I want to see how you handle the aircraft when you're not busy posturing. She was making him fly. He thought she would take the controls to prove a point. But no, she was making him work for her. She was making him chauffeur her plane while she graded him. Cleared for takeoff, the tower chirped. Aaron pushed the throttles forward. The G650ER surged. The power was immense, pushing them back into the sheepskin seats. 80 knots, Emma called out. Cross-check. Checked, Aaron managed. V1, rotate. Aaron pulled back on the yoke. The jet leapt off the tarmac, climbing aggressively into the grey New Jersey sky. For a second, the pure joy of flight took over. The sensation of lift the power, the world dropping away. But then he looked right and saw Emma Johnson, writing something in a small black notebook on her lap. She was taking notes. Aaron's sweat broke through his starch-stiffened shirt. It was going to be a 6-hour flight to London Luton. 6 hours in a box with his executioner. 2 hours into the flight, they were cruising at flight level 450, 45,000 feet high above the Atlantic Ocean. The view was spectacular. A curve of the Earth visible against the dark blue of the stratosphere. But inside the cockpit, the air was stale with unresolved tension. Aaron had engaged the autopilot shortly after passing Nantucket. He had tried to initiate small talk twice, desperate to break the ice to normalize things. Smooth air up here today. He had ventured around Nova Scotia. Emma hadn't even looked up from the iPad, where she was reviewing company financials. Standard lapse rate. Nothing unusual. Silence. 20 minutes later, I heard the new G700s are coming out soon. Is the company looking at them? Emma swiped a page on her screen. I have a meeting with Gulfstream in Savannah next month to discuss fleet modernization. Whether you will be certified to fly them is a matter of ongoing debate. Aaron flinched. He stopped talking after that. He busied himself with the radar, tilting it down, to scan for weather that wasn't there. He was bored, anxious, and tired. He was used to first officers who flattered him, who asked for his war stories. Emma was an impenetrable wall of competence. Then the master caution light flashed amber. A single chime resonated through the quiet cockpit. Aaron jumped in his seat. He scanned the EIKS engine indication and crew alerting system display. What was that? I've got a left bleed air fail. Aaron's training kicked in, but it was overlaid with panic. A bleed air failure at 45,000 feet was serious. That system pressurized the cabin. If they lost pressurization here, they had seconds of useful consciousness before hypoxia set in. Actioning the checklist, Aaron said, his voice rising an octave. He reached for the overhead panel to isolate the valve. I'm shutting down the left bleed. Wait, Emma said. Her hand shot out, grabbing his wrist. Her grip was surprisingly strong. Don't touch it, she commanded. Are you crazy? Aaron yelled, ripping his arm away. It's a bleed fail. We need to isolate the leak before we lose cabin pressure. If that air is contaminated or hot, we cook the systems. Look at the delta P, Emma said calmly, pointing at the pressurization gauge. Look at the cabin altitude. It's holding steady at 4,800 feet. The outflow valve hasn't moved. Aaron blinked, looking at the gauges. She was right. The cabin pressure wasn't dropping. The valve wasn't compensating for a leak. It's a sensor ghost, Emma said, releasing her seatbelt and leaning forward to tap the display. This aircraft, N728LW, had a firmware update on the air data computer last week. There's a known bug in the logic sequence when the anti-ice cycles in high-altitude cruise. It throws a false flag on the bleed valve. Aaron stared at her. A bug? If you shut down that valve manually like you were about to, Emma continued, her voice low and dangerous, you would have forced the system into single-pack operation. At this altitude, with the current ozone converter load, that would have actually caused a pressure bump and likely tripped the other pack offline. You would have depressurized us by trying to fix a problem that doesn't exist. Aaron sat back, his heart hammering against his ribs. He felt sick. He had almost dumped the cabin pressure because he reacted by rote memory instead of analyzing the system. How do you know that? He whispered. Because I read the technical bulletins, Richard, she said, finally looking him in the eye with a mix of disappointment and anger. I read the maintenance logs. I know every bolt, every wire, and every line of code in this aircraft. I don't just drive it. I understand it. She reached up and pressed the master caution reset button. The light went out. The system status remained normal. You were about to declare an emergency and dive us to 10,000 feet in the middle of the Atlantic tracks, Emma said. You would have woken up Mr. Thorne, terrified the passengers, and burned 5,000 pounds of fuel recovering, all because you didn't know your aircraft. Aaron stared at the instruments. The digits blurred. He had spent the morning calling her incompetent. He had told Thorne she wasn't ready, and here in the cold light of the stratosphere, she had just saved him from a career-ending error. Aaron rubbed his face. I didn't see the bulletin. Because you don't read them. You rely on your years of experience, Emma mocked his earlier tone. Experience is valuable, Richard, but complacency is lethal. You stopped learning 10 years ago. You think the stripes on your shoulder mean you know everything. Today that arrogance almost caused an incident. Aaron looked out the side window. The sky was a deep, unforgiving purple-black. He felt small. For the first time in decades, he didn't feel like the captain. He felt like a passenger. Taking controls, Emma said softly. What? I said I have controls, she repeated. You're rattled. Your heart rate is probably 140. You're fixated on your mistake. Take a break. Get some water. I'll fly the plane." Aaron hesitated. Surrendering controls in the middle of a cruise was a concession of defeat. "I have controls," he mumbled, letting go of the yoke. "You have controls?" Emma placed her hand on the side stick. "I have controls." She didn't make a big show of it. She just scanned the instruments, made a minor adjustment to the heading bug to account for wind drift. Something Aaron had neglected for the last hour, and settled back. Aaron sat there, hands in his lap, stripped of his power. The silence returned, but the dynamic had shifted permanently. He wasn't the mentor. He wasn't the boss. He was the liability. "Why didn't you fire me back at Teterboro?" Aaron asked after a long time. His voice was hollow. Emma didn't look at him. She kept her eyes on the horizon. "Because my father believed in second chances," she said, "and because firing you on the tarmac would have delayed the flight. I don't let emotions dictate business decisions." She paused, then turned to him, her expression softening just a fraction, though her eyes remained hard. "But make no mistake, Richard. You are flying for your job right now. When we land in London, I'm going to make a decision, and right now it's not looking good for you." Aaron nodded slowly. The fear was gone, replaced by a dull ache of reality. He looked at the woman next to him, really looked at her, and saw the steel that he had mistaken for weakness. He realized then that the color of her skin and her gender had blinded him to the only thing that mattered in a cockpit competence, and he was terrified that he was too late to fix it. "Prepare for descent briefing," Emma commanded. "We'll be contacting London Control in 20 minutes. I want you to brief the arrival into Luton. And Richard, do it perfectly." "Yes, Captain," Aaron said. And this time he meant it. The Atlantic was behind them, a vast expanse of indifference, but the real enemy waited ahead. London airspace was a chaotic web of holding patterns, stressed controllers, and rapidly deteriorating weather. Legacy 728 London Control. Expect the DAT-1A arrival. Descend flight level 240. Speed 250 knots. Descend 240. Speed 250. Legacy 728. Aaron replied. His voice was steadier now, but the sweat soaking his collar betrayed him. He was exhausted. The adrenaline spike from the phantom sensor failure had left him drained, and now the grey soup of the UK weather was closing in. Emma was working the radios and the flight management system FMS with a rhythm that was hypnotic. She anticipated frequency changes before they happened. She had the approach plates for Luton queued up on the multifunction displays before Aaron even asked. "ATIS reports Luton visibility is dropping," Emma said, tapping the screen. "RVR runway visual range is down to 600 meters. Fog is thickening. Temperature and dew point are matching. It's going to be soup." Aaron nodded, gripping the yoke. "We're Cat 2 certified. We can handle 300 meters. I've flown approaches into Moscow blind. This is just a Tuesday." He was trying to sound confident, trying to reclaim some scrap of the authority he had lost. But the swagger was hollow. "London Control Legacy 7228. The radio barked the controller's voice, sounding harried. "Break off arrival. Turn left heading 092. Enter the hold at Abbott. Maintain flight level 120. Expect further clearance time. Indeterminate." Aaron frowned. Indeterminate. "What the hell is going on?" Emma keyed the mic. "Legacy 728, turning left, 090, entering the hold. Reason for delay." "Legacy 728, a Ryanair 737 has suffered a gear collapse on the runway at Luton. The airport is closed until the aircraft is recovered. Estimate at least 45 minutes. The cockpit went silent. The only sound was the hum of the avionics and the rush of wind. 45 minutes, plus the approach time, plus the taxi. Aaron's eyes darted to the fuel gauges. He did the mental math, and his stomach dropped through the floor. The numbers flashed in his mind, like a neon sign, warning of impending doom. Burn rate at this altitude. Holding speed. He looked at the total fuel indication. It read 200 pounds remaining. If they held for 45 minutes, they would burn roughly 2,500 pounds. That would leave them with 3,700 pounds to shoot an approach. If they missed the approach and had to divert to Stansted, they would land with fumes. But then the horror hit him. The order. Back at Teterboro, he had tried to cancel Emma's fuel order. He had wanted to take 28,000 pounds instead of 30,000 to save weight and optimize climb. If he had won that argument, if he had successfully bullied her into taking 2,000 pounds less, they would currently have 4,200 pounds on board. Subtract the holding burn of 2,500. That would leave 1,700 pounds. 1,700 pounds on a G650 was nothing. It was panic fuel. It was Mayday fuel. It meant that right now, instead of entering a hold, they would be declaring a fuel emergency cutting in front of traffics and forcing a dangerous landing at a diversion airport, risking the lives of Elias Thorne and everyone on board. Aaron stared at the gauge, his face turning the color of ash. The arrogance of his morning, the way he had sneered at her for ordering extra gas, came crashing down on him. He wasn't just wrong. He had been legally, lethally wrong. Emma noticed his fixation on the fuel panel. She didn't smile. She didn't gloat. She simply leaned over and tapped the gauge with her index finger. 2,000 pounds, Richard, she said softly. Aaron couldn't look at her. That's the difference between a standard holding pattern and a catastrophic emergency. She continued, her voice devoid of emotion, which made it cut deeper. You wanted to save the company $400 in fuel drag. You almost cost us the airframe. Aaron croaked. I thought... You didn't think, she interrupted. You assumed that because the sun was shining in New Jersey, it would be shining in London. You assumed that nothing ever goes wrong. And you assumed that I was padding the numbers because I didn't know how to calculate a burn profile. She turned back to the radio, adjusting the frequency. We have the fuel to hold for 45 minutes and still divert to Stansted with legal reserves. We are safe. But we are only safe because I ignored you. Aaron gripped the yoke until his knuckles turned white. He felt a physical wave of nausea. He realized then that he wasn't sitting next to a diversity hire. He was sitting next to a pilot who was exponentially better than him because she respected the sky while he only expected the sky to respect him. Thank you, he whispered. It was barely audible. Don't thank me, Emma said, eyes scanning the traffic display. Just fly the hold and keep it smooth. Mr. Thorne is trying to sleep. 30 minutes into the hold, the situation deteriorated further. Legacy 728 be advised. Luton is now estimating 2 hours for runway clearance, the controller announced. Diversions are recommended. Stansted is accepting traffic but reports strong gusting crosswinds, 240 at 30, gusting 45. Copy Legacy 728, Emma replied instantly. We are diverting to Stansted. Request vectors for the ILS runway 22. Turn right heading 180, descend 6,000 feet. Aaron initiated the turn. His hands were shaking again. Gusts of 45 knots. That was right at the limit of the G650's demonstrated crosswind component. and he was tired. His confidence was shattered. Do you want to take this one?" Aaron asked, looking at Emma. It was a surrender. He was admitting he didn't have the stomach for a maximum limit landing after 6 hours of psychological torture. Emma looked at him. For a second he thought she would take it. It would be easier for her. She was fresh, sharp, and clearly in command. "No," she said. Aaron blinked. "What? You are the captain of record on this flight log," Emma said. "Mr. Thorne expects you to land this airplane. If I take over now, and we have a hard landing, you'll blame the wind or the plane. You need to do this. You need to prove to me and to yourself that you are actually capable of doing your job when it's not easy." She adjusted her headset. "I will back you up. I'll handle the throttles if you need, and I'll call out the deviations. But you are flying this approach, Richard. Put it on the center line." It wasn't a pep talk. It was a test, a trial by fire. They descended into the murk. The turbulence kicked in at 4,000 feet, violent, jarring shudders that rattled the teeth. The rain lashed against the windshield, sounding like gravel. "Localizer alive," Emma called out. "Glide slope alive." "Gear down," Aaron ordered. His voice was tight. "Gear down. 3 green." The wind shear alarms blared momentarily as a gust hit them from the side. The huge jet yawed aggressively to the left. Aaron fought the yoke, his forearms burning. He was overcorrecting. He was tense. "Relax your grip." Emma's voice cut through the noise, calm and authoritative. "You're choking the yoke. Fly with your fingertips. Anticipate the gust, don't react to it." Aaron forced himself to breathe. He loosened his death grip. She was right. He was fighting the plane instead of flying it. 1,000 feet. Stable," Emma called. "Speed is target +10, correcting for gusts." They broke out of the clouds at 600 feet. The runway lights of Stansted were a blurred streak in the rain, skewed heavily to the right because of the crab angle Aaron was holding to fight the wind. The plane was pointing almost 40 degrees away from the runway, just to fly straight. "Ref warning," Emma said. "Watch your speed. Don't let it bleed off." I got it," Aaron muttered, sweat stinging his eyes. The ground rushed up. The wind howled, trying to flip the wing up. 50 feet. 30. Kick it straight, Emma commanded. Aaron stomped on the left rudder pedal to align the nose with the runway, while simultaneously dipping the right wing into the wind. It was a cross-control maneuver that required finesse. He was late. The wind caught the upwind wing. The plane ballooned, floating dangerously. "Down! Put it down!" Emma shouted, her hand hovering over the yoke. Aaron shoved the nose down. It was ugly. Slam! The right main gear smashed into the concrete with a bone-jarring impact that shook the entire airframe. The plane bounced, teetering. Aaron wrestled it, slamming the nose gear down hard. "Reverse thrust air brakes," Emma yelled. Her hands flying across the console to deploy the spoilers, because Aaron had frozen for a microsecond. The engines roared in reverse, slowing the beast as it skidded slightly on the wet pavement before the anti-skid system bit in. Aaron stood on the brakes, his heart rate probably touching 180. They slowed to a taxi speed. "Legacy 728 vacate right when able," the tower said, sounding unimpressed. Aaron taxied off the runway, his legs trembling so hard he could barely keep pressure on the pedals. He had landed. They were alive. But it was a garbage landing. Amateur hour. He pulled into the FBO ramp, the signature flight support building looming in the rain. He set the parking brake and shut down the engines. The silence that rushed into the cockpit was deafening. Aaron slumped in his seat, head hanging low. He waited for the reprimand. He waited for her to tell him he nearly collapsed the landing gear. The cockpit door opened. Elias Thorne poked his head in. "Whoa!" Thorne laughed, clapping his hands. "That was a cowboy landing. Rick felt like we were riding a bull, but you got us down. Good work battling that storm." Thorne had no idea. He thought the slam was just the weather. He didn't know Aaron had misjudged the flare. "Thank you, Mr. Thorne," Aaron said, his voice weak. "I'll see you guys in 3 days for the return," Thorne asked, grabbing his bag. Aaron looked at Emma. She was finishing the shutdown checklist, her face unreadable. "Safe travels, Elias," Emma said pleasantly, turning to the billionaire. "We'll be here." Thorne exited. Aaron unbuckled his harness. He felt like he had aged 10 years in 6 hours. He looked at Emma. "I don't," Emma said, holding up a hand. She unclipped her headset and hung it up. She turned to him, and the look in her eyes was terrifyingly cold. "You were behind the aircraft from the moment we disconnected the autopilot," she said. "You were slow on the rudder. You floated the flare. You almost scraped the wingtip pod. If I hadn't deployed the spoilers manually, we would have gone off the side of the runway." Aaron nodded. He had no defense. "Pack your bag, Richard," Emma said, standing up and grabbing her blazer. Am I fired?" Aaron asked, his voice trembling. The question hung in the air, pathetic and small. Emma looked down at him. "We are going to the hotel. You and I are going to have a debrief. And then I am going to decide if you ever sit in a cockpit of mine again. But right now, you're not a captain. You're a liability." She turned and walked out of the cockpit, leaving Aaron alone with the cooling instruments and the crushing weight of his own karma. He had spent his career thinking he was the best, looking down on everyone who didn't look like him. And now the very person he had dismissed was holding his life in her hands, and he knew he didn't deserve her mercy. The lobby bar of the Radisson Blu at Stansted Airport was quiet, filled with the low murmur of stranded travelers and the clinking of glass. Outside, the wind still hammered against the panes, a reminder of the chaotic approach they had just survived. Richard Aaron sat in a corner booth, staring into a glass of whiskey he hadn't touched. His hands were still trembling. Every time he closed his eyes, he saw the runway rushing up at him, felt the sickening lurch of the aircraft as the wind caught the wing. He knew he had frozen. He knew that if Emma Johnson hadn't been in that right seat, N728LW would currently be a smoking wreck in the Essex mud. He looked up as Emma approached. She had changed out of her uniform into a sharp, dark business suit. She looked like exactly what she was, a CEO. She didn't look tired. She looked resolved. She sat down opposite him. She didn't order a drink. She placed a single manila envelope on the table between them. "This is a severance package," she said. No preamble, no warm-up. Aaron flinched as if she had slapped him. "Emma, Ms. Johnson, please." It was one bad approach. The weather was historic. "You heard the tower." "It wasn't the weather, Richard," Emma said, her voice level, but devastatingly cold. "It was the fuel. It was the sensor. It was the refusal to listen. The landing was just the symptom of a pilot who has lost his edge." She leaned forward, clasping her hands. "I did a review of your flight data from the last 6 months while you were in the shower. This wasn't an isolated incident. You've been coasting. You've been ignoring SOPs. You've been bullying first officers into silence so they wouldn't report your errors. You created a cockpit culture of fear, and today that culture almost killed us." Aaron felt the walls closing in. I have a mortgage. I have alimony. I'm 58 years old. Who is going to hire me at this level? No one, Emma said simply. The word hung in the air like a guillotine blade. You are a liability, Richard. I cannot in good conscience recommend you to another operator for a Part 135 captain position. You are unsafe. Aaron's face crumpled. You're blacklisting me. Because I was rude to you on the ramp. This is revenge. Emma shook her head, a look of genuine pity crossing her face. That is exactly your problem. You think everything is personal. You think I'm doing this because you hurt my feelings, Richard. I run $100 million company. I don't care about your manners. I care about my asset. I care about my passengers. You tried to cancel a fuel order that saved our lives today. That is not a personality clash. That is gross negligence. She tapped the envelope. Inside is a ticket back to JFK, economy class. You are relieved of duty effectively immediately. A replacement crew is already flying in from Paris to take Mr. Thorne back on Thursday. Economy, Aaron whispered, the indignity stinging more than the firing. It's what you can afford now, Emma said. She stood up. And Richard, one last thing. Aaron looked up, his eyes rimmed with red. My father Marcus used to say that a pilot's ego writes checks that his skills can't cash. Today, your account went overdrawn. She turned to leave, but stopped. I was reviewing the HR files last week. Before I met you today, I had flagged your file for a promotion to chief pilot of the fleet. It came with a $50,000 raise and a guaranteed pension. I wanted someone with experience to mentor the new hires. Aaron's mouth fell open. The air left his lungs. I thought you were the old guard, she said, softly. I thought you were the best. It's a shame you spent so much time trying to prove I didn't belong in the cockpit that you forgot to prove you did. She walked away, her heels clicking on the marble floor, the same sound that had annoyed him on the tarmac that morning. Now it sounded like the ticking of a clock that had run out of time. The rain lashed against the fuselage of the battered Cessna Caravan. It was 3:30 a.m. in a remote cargo hub in Ohio. Richard Aaron sat in the cockpit drinking lukewarm coffee from a thermos. He was tired. His back hurt. He was flying overnight freight boxes of auto parts and Amazon packages for a regional carrier that paid by the mile and didn't offer health insurance. He looked out the window as a sleek silver Gulfstream G650ER taxied past him on the main runway, preparing for a departure to somewhere warm, somewhere expensive. The tail number caught the floodlight, N728 Lahul. Aaron watched it go. He saw the silhouette of the pilot in the left seat. It was a woman. Even from here, he could see the perfect posture, the discipline. Hey, old-timer, the kid in the right seat of the Cessna said a 20-year-old building hours. Nice jet, huh? Maybe one day, right? Aaron watched the Gulfstream roar down the runway, lifting effortlessly into the night sky, its strobe lights blinking like diamonds against the darkness. It carried the future. It carried the legacy he had thrown away, because he couldn't see past his own prejudice. Yeah, Aaron whispered, turning back to his dimly lit instrument panel, filled with analog gauges and worn-out switches. Maybe one day. But take it from me, kid. When you get to the top, make sure you check your ego at the door, or you'll find yourself right back at the bottom. He pushed the throttle forward, and the old propeller plane lumbered into the dark, leaving the jet stream of the life he used to have far, far behind. This story isn't just about a pilot and a plane. It's about the dangerous blindness of arrogance. Richard Aaron thought his stripes and his tenure made him untouchable. He judged Emma Johnson by her appearance, her age, and her gender, never realizing that she held the keys to his entire kingdom. He didn't just lose a job, he lost his legacy, because he refused to respect the person sitting next to him. In aviation, as in life, respect isn't about hierarchy. It's about recognizing competence. The moment you think you're too good to learn from others is the moment you start your descent. What do you think? Was Emma too harsh, or did Richard get exactly what he deserved? Let me know in the comments below. If you enjoyed this story, please hit that like button. It really helps the channel. Don't forget to subscribe and ring the bell so you never miss a new story. Thanks for watching and fly safe.